Ladies and gentlemen, to a meeting of the North Penn School Board of School Directors, March 9th, 1999. Tonight's meeting will consist of a special action meeting before our scheduled work session. The meeting is being videotaped for community cable channels. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of the Pennsylvania Sunshine Law, it is necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To assure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the board come to the microphone and state their name and address. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to no more than 5 minutes. This limit will permit time for all those who wish to speak to the board to do so, and whenever members of the audience exceed this time limit, the board president may ask the individual to yield the microphone to the next speaker. And this is in reference to board policy 8344.2. Okay, at this time, would Ms. Sykes lead us in a pledge of allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All right. Before we begin, student cameraman, would you get a close-up of the new glasses on Dr. Miller? They're a lovely model. They're lovely. And also, we have a whole new pair of specs on Dr. Venema. Put them on there, Don.
They're content.
Yes. They're the $10 reading glasses. He's got them all over the building. Any reading glasses, please return them to Marilyn Canavan. Okay. Folks, this is a special action meeting at this time. We start out with audience of citizens. This is your turn before any action is taken this evening, and you'll see from your agenda what those actions could be. Anybody wish to address the board at this time? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Okay, superintendent.
Okay, superintendent's report. Recommend approval of Eastern Consultants to provide the necessary engineering services for the cooling and ventilation of 15 technology lab spaces. The fee for this service shall be 7% of the total cost of the project.
So moved.
Motion by Schilling, second by Shapinsky. Questions?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Art, when you send out for a proposal like this, do you have some kind of feel how much the total project will cost?
Yeah, we thought initially, Bill, that this would be in the range of $100,000, and I personally think it will be a tad higher. But the first engineer, Byro, gave us a number he did that as a favor to us, and then we used his number in getting both RFPs back.
No, all right, thank you.
I had a
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mosen.
You're talking about, I thought we had budget 88,000 for this.
98,000.
98,000. You're saying it's going to be well over 100,000?
I don't know that. We won't know that until we open them, but it's, there's a lot of work, hidden work, for an example, at Brook and Field, because they're poured concrete slabs for the roof deck. And you have to go through them. So that's my guess, but it's a guess until we open the bids.
Did we budget this?
I don't know. That's out of technology. I think it's part of phase 1 technology. I wasn't part of budgeting it, this part of doing it.
Does anybody know it is budgeted? Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you.
Recommend approval to open an account with the INVEST program for local governments as a possible investment vehicle in the future, item number 22-99.
So moved.
Motion by O'Donnell, second by Perkowski. Questions left? Ms. Perkowski, did you have a question? Around? Right? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you.
And under personnel, recommend approval of a change of status for Heidi McKinney, effective March 1st, 1999, from the assignment at Oak Park Music, half-time professional, to Oak Park Winnoor Music, full-time professional. This is a result of increased enrollments that we've been monitoring since the beginning of the school year.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's increased enrollment or increased participation in the program?
Well, I said enrollment, participation.
Okay.
And
How
that
many-
E-word's,
Coffee.
yeah, that E-word's very,
How many
Yes, that
how many
increased.
are we over or above, or,
I'll turn it over to Betty, tracking
in
this.
other words, what did we start out with and what are we at now? That required this?
She started out with 209 students. She's now at 192, which puts her And that's with the enrollment period being over. The trial period, the students, when they enroll in the program, they have a 3-month trial period. So you typically lose some students. So she lost about 17 students. But it still puts her over the other instrumental music teachers by about 40 students on average.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
That's concerning. Okay, folks, I need a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Prokowski, second by
Second. Phil?
Allen. Any further questions? You had some questions previous to the motion, but are there any further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, no. You got 4 more years. Bob. You got 4 more years. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move right into our regularly scheduled committee meeting. This evening, you'll see your agenda has matters of finance and matters of educational services. So at this time, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Okay, as discussed at the Finance Committee meeting, we had a presentation on a potential bond refinancing, and the Finance Committee asked to have this brought to the work session this week, and that's what we'll proceed with. I'll turn it over to Mr. Sowers to introduce our guests.
We have presentation by Dalton and Bradbury in conjunction with Oracle Lestrange and Company and a possible refinancing of the district's outstanding indebtedness.
Good evening. My name is Steve Moynihan. I'm president of Dalton and Bradbury. Many of you know my partner, Bob Bradbury, who's unable to be here tonight because he's at Boyertown Area School District purchasing a bond issue. I'd also like to, at this time, introduce our partner in this transaction, Les Baer from Arthur Lestrange, and also from Dave Franklin's office, Pepper Hamilton and Sheets, Claudia Keefe, who is in the back there. The presentation that we made at the Finance Committee meeting last week is summarized in the refunding study. I noticed that it's attached to your agenda tonight. We have additional copies if anybody needs them. I've also handed out tonight a supplement of this report, which attempts to answer some of the questions that were raised at the meeting last week. I believe that we covered in detail the refunding study, and I'd just like to introduce the supplement that we handed out tonight. On the first page, the purpose is to contrast this new method of refinancing, which is a combination of taxable and tax-exempt bonds, to do what you otherwise couldn't do with tax-exempt bonds alone. Option number 2 is just straight standard refunding that could be accomplished in 1999 using tax-exempt bonds only. The difference, the cash savings for capital projects for option number 1 is $1,610,000. With a standard refunding, that same number would be down to approximately $807,000. So this method produces, option number 1 produces almost twice as much savings in terms of cash for capital projects, $1.6 million versus $807,000. The analysis, the reason why it produces more savings is that by combining taxable and tax-exempt bonds, you're able to refund the higher cost debt of the school district, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to do under the normal refunding procedure. Schedule 2, or I should say Schedule 1, is just a listing of the annual debt service that is expected to be refunded under option number 1. Total of 7 issues on an annual basis, starting with school year 1999-2000, going out to 2016-2017. That is the debt service to be refunded. Schedule 2 of our supplemental report is a savings summary. You can see that the new issue total principal amount column is $61,975,000, to which the interest is added. The interest rates for the first three maturities represent taxable interest rates. The remaining maturities, starting in 2003, going out to 2017, those are tax-exempt rates. The annual debt service, principal plus interest, is then compared with the prior debt service from the Schedule 1. So you can see that on an annual basis, there is essentially a matching of new debt service with old debt service, so that the debt service burden in any particular year is not increased in any significant way. The $61,975,000 principal amount will repay those issues that are listed on Schedule 1. The debt service that's to be refunded. Those are the deposits to the escrow accounts for restricted yields for tax-exempt bonds, for unrestricted yields for the taxable bonds, the $48 million and the $11 million that will repay the debt, and that debt will no longer be deemed debt of the school district. The financing expenses are estimated to be just under $590,000, and the balance is money that's available for capital projects, so that the annual debt service has not been increased, and the money that is available to the school district is approximately $1,610,000. I should point out at this point that the $1,600,000 is not something that's locked in tonight. It's subject to interest rate variation. If interest rates should change, go up or down, and we'll use 10 basis points as sensitivity factor. 10 basis points is 1/10 of 1%. In other words, where you see a 4.95%, if that was to be 5.05, and that's 10% or 10 basis points went throughout all those yields, the savings instead of being $1,610,000 would be about $1,420,000. We're down about $190,000. So it is sensitive to changes in interest rates, and it's something that can be improved or diminished as we go forward in this process. The Schedule 3 is the standard refunding. There are two issues, the 94 and the 96, which can be refunded on a tax-exempt basis and save money. If those were to be done at the interest rates for tax-exempt bonds, the savings, instead of being $1,610,000, would be $807,000. Smaller issue, the deposits to the escrow accounts would take care of the 94 and the 96 series, and the financing expenses would be correspondingly lower because the principal amount is lower. Schedule 4 is the cash savings that are generated by using taxable and tax-exempt bonds. We said that line item for the entire issue is $1,610,000. The individual issues, the 1999 series issued to refund, the 7 series are then set forth. So we've broken down the issues of $50 million tax-exempt and 11.7 taxable to show you what principal amounts are being used to refund the particular issues and which ones are providing the lion's share of the savings. When you go through the cash savings for capital projects line, starting with $1,600,000, you can see that the cash savings for the 1992 series AAA and the 1993 series AA are significant in terms of their percentage. It's $853 for the 1992 AAA series and $148,000 for the 1993 AA series. And then as we go over the 1996 series, it's $433,000. Those two issues, the 1992 and the 1993, they could not be redone. They could not be done under the method number 2, so that by using the taxable and tax-exempt financing vehicle, you're able to finance, you're able to refund the 92 and the 93, generating nice savings that you couldn't otherwise do. The same type of analysis is set forth for option 2, the standard refunding, and you can see that the cash savings, the 117,000 comes from the 94 series, and approximately 690,000 comes from refunding the 96 series. The final schedule, Schedule 6, answers the question, what if the $1.6 million was taken out? It was not used for capital projects, but the savings was taken in the form of debt service, annual debt service reductions. We've kept the amount of taxable bonds the same and reduced the amount of tax-exempt bonds. So that you can see that the total issue is $60,355,000, smaller than the other issue by approximately $1,600,000. That there is no cash for capital projects. The deposit to the escrow accounts remains the same, and the financing expenses are slightly lower because of the bond issue being lower. So that by reducing the size of the issue, the annual savings are then approximately $42,000 next year, $71,000 next 2 years, and then $151,000 the fourth year, and going down approximately $150,000 each year from '03 to 2017. That's how the $1.6 million in cash for capital projects would translate into annual debt service savings, a total of approximately $2.4 million. Without, we didn't change the taxable bonds. So we could, in another configuration, do that in order to level out the savings. And if we did it, it would be approximately $120,000 for each of those years, starting from the year 2000, going out to the year 2017. So that's the supplement to our report, March the 2nd. And there are backup schedules which address the particular bonds that are being refunded, interest rates that apply to those bonds. It's a handout that is probably 15 pages long. I have 10 copies here tonight for anybody who would like to get them, so that you can have a complete picture if you so desire. Our 2 studies here are just executive summaries for purposes of presentation tonight.
Steve, leave all 10 copies with Ms. Liberowski, please, for members of the board. Also, this handout that you provided us with early this evening, do you have any more of these?
Yes.
Can we have whatever you have so we can hand them out, at least to the members of the press right away? And folks, these are being run off right now by Mr. Bolton. If we can have these now, I appreciate it. Super.
These are the supplemental reports.
Oh, the supplements.
The ones we just handed out tonight.
Thanks, Bob. All righty. Okay, Steve, if we're ready, we're going to take board questions around, and then we'll definitely take questions from the audience. Before we do, I want to first, I'd like to thank Mr. O'Donnell as chairman of the Finance Committee on some good work and good research being done. And Jim, I want to thank you I owe you a thank you for bringing the potential situation here to the attention of not only Dr. Hassler, but Mr. Lestrange and Dolphin and Bradley. Thank you. All right, board questions to the left. Mr. Mosey?
Thank you. Just 2, if I can. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the supplemental sheets, because one of the things we asked with our finance committee was we wanted to see how much longer we had to go on each one of these issues. And it looks like if we refinance all these issues, we'll combine them into one, which will be an 18-year bond. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just looking now, it looks like the average goes from about 8 years. We only have one bond currently, which is the 96 bond. That's a 17-year bond. The rest are anywhere from, looks like 8 to 12 years. So we'd actually be extending our our bonds by 6 years if we, over roughly about 6 years going to this new method. Is that correct?
Extension of debt?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't characterize it as debt extension.
Well, if we refinance all these bonds and we combine them, we're looking at one bond about 18 years. Is that correct? It's an
No,
18-year bond.
No, that's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then I'm looking and I see a 1992 issue which will be paid off in the year 2010. 93 will be paid off in 2012. 94, 2012. 96 is 2017. But what I guess what I'm saying is, it's nice to see $1.6 million to come back to that we could use for capital projects. But I just have a concern, is it worth extending, going out on an average about another 5 to 6 years, when some of these bonds will be paid off well before the 18-year period? Am I incorrect in that assumption, or am I mixing apples and oranges here?
Well, one of the requirements that we'll have to do for tax law is to determine what's known as the weighted average maturity of each issue that's being refunded, and then collectively, and then compare that with the weighted average maturity of the new issue. And in similar type refundings, we found that there's very little difference. And particularly in this particular structure, where the maturity date occurs 9/1 of the fiscal year, as opposed to one of your older issues that occurs in March 15th, I would expect that the average life on the new issue would be shorter than the average combined average life of the bonds that are being refunded. Another thing, if
You'll have to do that, you're saying, though, right?
we have to do that.
Okay. So we will get that information then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, not really a question, it's more or less a statement. Mr. Bradbury made a point at our finance meeting that if we fell below $1.5 million, that he would not recommend that we do this. You're saying right now, or as we're at $1,410,000, I think you said?
If interest rates change,
You said the $1,000,006 is not locked in. We're closer to $1,410,000. Is that correct?
no, I didn't mean to say that.
Oh, where did I get that figure?
What I was trying to do is have a sensitivity on
Okay.
savings.
Okay.
So if we kept everything the same and interest rates increased by 10 basis points,
Right.
then the savings would be approximately $1,420,000, or
Okay.
down $190,000.
Okay.
If the interest rates came down, then the converse would true. The savings would approach $1,800,000.
Okay. All right, that's all I have. I just wanted to just point that out to the board, that Mr. Bradbury did make that statement, that if we couldn't get at least $1.5 million in doing this, he would not recommend that we do it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions around?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You follow the interest rate, Steve, every day.
Yes.
Is there any general trend right now? So that, I guess the question is rates going up, down, is it a state of flux? Do we have to make a decision tonight? Should we make something real soon?
Well, the interest rates, I would say you generally characterize them as going up since December into February. And then at the end of last week, we saw them coming back down again. If I can use the 30-year Treasury bond as a benchmark for interest rates, the 30-year Treasury bond in the fall was as low as about 4.7%. Before Friday, it was as high as 5.7%. So in a period of about 4 or 5 months, the Treasury rate, the taxable rate, has moved about a percentage point, or 100 basis points. Municipal rates have not moved that much, but they have moved upwards. What we see are fluctuations that occurred. Bonds that were sold 2 or 3 weeks ago were sold at lower interest rates than they were last week. And then bonds that were sold this week were probably at slightly lower rates than they were last week. So there's a fluctuation that goes on. What we recommend most to our clients is that they select a target. And Bob Bradbury mentioned $1.5 million, and that the financing team is authorized to do the necessary legal work and paperwork to prepare a bond purchase proposal on a certain day. Say, in this case, it might be May 15th. And that way, the board is in a position to receive a bond purchase proposal, and if interest rates are favorable, then we'll submit that bond purchase proposal, and if they're unfavorable, we'll just put it on hold. And of course, there's no obligation to the school district for any expenses that are incurred for being prepared to submit a bond purchase proposal.
So then it would be advantageous for this board then to recommend tonight to move ahead with that legal work. Okay. It's my understanding that if we don't do anything, we say, let's forget it, we will lose out on $1 million, $5 million, whatever the number is. Is that correct?
Well, with this particular structure, the key date as far as closing the transaction cannot be any later than the last day in August. So in order to close the transaction on the last day of August, you have to have a bond purchase proposal by the end of July in order to allow enough time for Harrisburg to approve the debt proceedings. So that with this particular structure, the way that the debt service is due on the outstanding bonds, which cannot be changed, it's fixed. So that the drop dead date for this particular savings would be the end of July.
So it would be advantageous, things Art Wood brought forth our several $1 million capital projects list the other day, would be advantageous for us. Again, if we don't do anything, we could lose $1.6 million. And we have, it's supposed to be used within 2 years for capital projects, right?
Well, you could always go back to option number 2, which, given no change in interest rates, would provide $800,000 instead of $1.6 million. So I would say that $800,000 is at risk.
All right, I think just a comment, I was a little taken back by the fees, and I've checked around, and it's unfortunate that that's what a school district pays, just like architectural fees too, we pay a high rate. I understand there's not too much that can be done about that, but again, I've done some checking, and I understand they are very reasonable, that's just a comment. Thank you.
Anybody else? This side? Brown? Bill? Okay.
I was at the Finance Committee meeting, but it was really a brief, basic discussion, so we're left here tonight with details. And I'd appreciate it, first of all, have a clear understanding of exactly what's happening with this very complex bond refinancing program that you're bringing forward, is to start with the beginning of that's on Schedule 6. I think for the audience, it's in their agenda. If I understand correctly, Schedule 6 shows us exactly what our starting principal amount due is, that we're talking about refunding. It shows that we have $88.9 million worth of outstanding principal debt at this, as of the established call date, I guess, subsequent to our March payment, which has already been made. We would be leaving unrefunded out of the 7 bonds, $32.2 million, correct?
Yes.
And we will be taking $56.7 million worth of principal and refunding that. And then to move to Schedule 1, now that we have our starting baseline there, as I read through this, we're going to go to the table and we're going to take out a bond for $62.97 million, $5.2 million more than the principal that's being refunded, correct?
Just under $62 million, yes.
Okay, so we're going to take out a bond for $5.2 million above the principal payments that are due on those bonds. Then I go down to the bonds, and I'm showing that for those $56.7 million in principal, we're paying an additional $3.03 million against those bonds on June 15th, correct?
I didn't follow that, no.
Just the bond listings themselves, from 93 AA down, all the way down the line to where we hit the 97, the amount that we'll be paying. In other words, we've got $26.5 on the 96A, on the 96 series bond in principal. But when we go to refund it, we're going to be applying $28.2 million of the proceeds against that bond.
Which schedule are you on?
Schedule 1.
Schedule?
Yeah, this didn't show what our actual principal is that we're refunding. Many thought that these numbers all represented the principal, and it's principal plus use of proceeds over and above. And so that's what I'm trying to be sure that I understand this correctly.
If we're using the 1996 as an example,
Well, that's as an example. I mean, the general total is $3.03 million above.
Is that the
principal.
same schedule they gave out tonight?
It's the one on the agenda, yes. It's the one from the Finance Committee, and it's attached to your agenda.
Okay, but you gave another one out tonight.
That
Would
was
they
a-
be different?
No,
different information?
the numbers are the same. The one that has Schedule 6, which has the listing of the bonds.
I'm working from those attached to the agenda because those are the ones that we had prior to this meeting.
Okay, but then there was another,
You know what, I think she's asking you about the cost to call, the early
Right.
redemption fee,
Right.
and the difference why 56 million,
Right.
745 versus 59, 775, and that's the
Right.
cost to call.
Right. If we can use the 1996 series as an example, you have just one item there. It's $28,205,995.
Right?
And then you go back to Schedule 6, and then you have the 1996 series as $26,585,000.
Right.
Okay. Now, the question is, why the difference?
Why do we have to use so much of the the increased indebtedness, why we have to spend so much of the proceeds at the table on June 15th?
Okay. That particular series cannot be called right away. The $28,205,000 represents the money that is put away on June the 1st. It buys investments that pay principal and interest, which will then pay off the 1996 series, principal and interest, until the issue can be called on its call date. Now, the amount of money that you can put away is at a restricted yield. You only are allowed to earn, on this particular situation, it's about 4.35%. But the interest rate that is on the bonds that continues to run the 1996 series is approximately 5.21%. So you've got to put away more principal invested at 4.35% in order to pay off a smaller amount of principal that is yielding 5.35%. So that it's a match, but your investment is a restricted yield by the Internal Revenue Code, and you can only earn 4.35%. That's why the cost of the escrow account to pay off the 96 series is higher than the principal amount of the bonds that are outstanding. This is true in all advance refundings that are done for interest rate savings purposes. All the escrow accounts are yield restricted. They have a lower yield that's controlled by the Internal Revenue Service Code, and the reason for doing the refunding, the interest rates on the bonds that are in the escrow account have a higher interest rate. So it's a matching of cash flows, and the principal amount that has to go away on day one is higher than the amount of principal that has to be paid off over the life of the escrow account.
But these, just to be sure that these expenses, the money that we're having to spend from the proceeds, the 5.2 of indebtedness over principal, hasn't been carried into your debt service schedule, because you're showing that debt service expenses just as of 9/1 forward, correct? In other words, this is expenses paid on June 15th that we're not seeing when we wouldn't see when we go to a debt service. Our debt service will still be $9.8 million come September, despite these payments that are being made.
Your debt service will be as shown.
Right. I'm just using approximates rather than getting everyone confused, but we'll have the same debt service payments on September 1, basically, minus 10,000, it'll be $10,000 higher only than what we have today.
That's correct.
But under today's scenario, we're not having to apply $3 million above the principal on June 15th.
Well,
And it's hard to say going to the table for $62 million and only walking away with $1.6 million in cash because it's costing you $3.6 million to make all of this work for an equal debt service in the future.
Right. Now, for debt service comparison, your debt service to debt service is essentially a match. And the amount of the bond issue, it is composed of the escrow accounts that will wipe off the debt of the school district. So that
But does that
56
bring
million.
does that bring us another asset besides the 1.6? I mean, is there another asset out there coming in the future? Out of this $3.6 million that we're taking out of proceeds and putting towards keeping that money out there?
Well, what's happening is that your escrow accounts are taking care of the existing debt. So you are substituting the new debt for the old debt. You're receiving $1.6 million in cash that you otherwise wouldn't have had, and the debt service remains the same, so that when everything is said and done, the old debt is paid for, the financing expenses are paid for, you have $1.6 million, and your debt service going forward is essentially the same.
Right, debt service going forward. Would this be akin that if I took $100,000 balance on my mortgage company, went back to the bank, took out a new financing for $150,000, and rather than raising my debt service, I gave them back $40,000 of the new borrowing
No,
on that day, and therefore I covered the $10,000 in extra
No,
money gained?
I like the mortgage analogy, but I would put it in this context. You're going to the mortgage company and you're saying, well, I now pay, pick a number, $1,000 a month. I want to keep my $1,000 a month. But now the interest rate is lower. It's lower by 1%.
Right.
So the mortgage company says, well, if you want to keep your payments the same, then the mortgage that you have will not only pay off your old mortgage, not only pay the points and expenses of the transaction, but it's also going to give you $10,000 to build that new deck that you didn't have. And your debt service stays the same. So you've got your old mortgage paid off, you got the expenses paid off, plus you have a new deck for your house.
Well, that seems like that would work, but only if you weren't raising your principal to do it. We're borrowing $5.2 million more to give us enough cash to pay $3.86 million
Under that,
in premium expenses, a June 15th expense, to leave us with $1.6 million in cash. And this is, I've seen lots of refundings. The straight refunding that you have here for $790,000, I would like to see that work to see what it would mean if in fact this board feels that it wants $1.6 million in additional borrowing. The major portion of the benefits is coming through that 96 bond. It doesn't, it has an 11 and a quarter year life. We're not taking a 1-year bond and stretching it into a tax exempt bond that pays nothing on principal for the first 3 years. But that bond alone is showing $790,000 in yield, is what you're saying in savings. And I didn't see anything that went to package that without, where a dollar for dollar principal increase would occur. 1.6 million in principal would pretty much match up with your rates for that 790,000, and we could package it the way you're doing it here and say, we've gained $1.6 million in new borrowing without costing another penny through the $790,000 savings.
well, I think you're referring to the option that we talked about on last
Right.
page of the schedule, of the report from last week.
Right.
And if we take a look at Schedule 5 from the supplemental report that we just handed out, that $790,000 has just been reconfigured to be $807.
Okay.
So that if you selected option number 2, your cash savings would be $807. Now that's the same as the $790 that we're showing. It's just that by putting a pencil and a computer to the expenses, some additional savings have been realized. Now, if you take the same question that you had for the 1996 series, you can see that the escrow account under the standard method is $28,000, 28 million, and you have to issue $28,975,000 for the 1996 series, and the debt that's being repaid is $26,585,000. So that, once again, you have this phenomenon where the principal goes up because the amount of the escrow account is higher than the outstanding principal, but you get your benefit because the interest rates are lower.
And that would leave us with the same debt service schedule?
Yes, yes. Option 2 is configured exactly the way option 1 is configured, a match of debt service on an annual basis going forward. And it's just that we're not refunding some of the higher cost bonds because you can't do a tax exempt under option number 2 where you can under option number 1.
Well, when we're finished with this, we would be taking 7 bonds and actually having 14, correct? In the end?
Which,
Taxable, tax exempt, and the unrefunded portions.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. Would you ask your question?
Now, on these bonds, as if you go with option 1, our portfolio would then have the existing unrefunded debt, and then on several of these bonds, like the 92A, there'll be a portion in a tax exempt, portion in a taxable, and the unfunded in the old series. And when we go to the 93, it's similar. There's a portion of it going to the taxable, portion of it going to the tax exempt, and some remaining in the other series. And all this is going to come together to the 1.6 million. But with the other, even though it's not as mesmerizing as 1.6 million, you're involving less total dollars, less transactions, and less costs to come with a straight $790,000 benefit. And what I was wondering is if this were taken, a $790,000 difference, if I took that same bond rates that you have here, and if I were to put $1.6 million into that on a 10-year bond as you have with the averages of 4.49%, it would seem to me that that in itself would cover that $790,000, and that one bond could be worked to provide a $1.6 million increased principal to come to the same result. And that's what I was wondering, did you work anything like that with that money rather than presenting it in the cash portion as you have, but similar to what option 1 is, which is borrowing more money to leave you with $1.6 million without increasing your indebtedness?
Well,
Or your debt service, rather. You're increasing your indebtedness because we're raising principal.
well, this particular transaction, except for option number 3 on our supplemental report presented tonight, is just how much will the school district realize in terms of cash for capital projects. And option number 1 is $1.6 million. Option number 2, it's about half as much. And the reason for that is that with option number 1, we are refunding higher cost debt, which you otherwise cannot do because we're using the taxable configuration. I realize your concern about principal repayment, and I'd just like to direct your attention to Schedule 2 of option number 1. Because we've done a debt service to debt service match, and the interest payment in the first year is going to essentially be 3 months, that means that a large amount of principal can be paid off. Within 3 months of the transaction, $6.6 million is going to disappear from the new debt of the school district. So that within year 1, you're going to be down on the new issue from 61.9 to approximately 55 million plus.
But isn't that also in part because we've paid $3.6 million over the principal on settlement day, June 15th, or
No,
whatever date you're settling it? I mean, obviously that money is doing something, and it's got to be applied towards debt service. We have no debt service payments left under your schedule the one that you just referenced, Schedule 2, or, I'm sorry, the one with the debt service payments outlined by bond. I think what first made me realize that we were prepaying on settlement date a significant amount of debt service payments, which of course aren't going to be due on September 1 if we've paid them June 15th, is that when you showed the debt service payment for the unfunded debt, September 1, you show absolutely no debt service payments at all under your new schedule, even though there's $32 million left untouched out of our whole portfolio. And I know the bank doesn't borrow money to us for a day without us having to pay for the time and rates of borrowing.
Well,
And that's on Schedule 5, and that's what first, I guess I realized there's something more happening within this transaction than the debt service as we see it on 9/1, and it took me to the rest of the sheets, and I then found that on September 15th, we're paying 100% of all of the interest payments through September 1 on all of our existing debt. We're paying it by borrowing more money and then giving the cash back to the bank.
now the debt service that's due on the new issue is going to be due on 9/1 and 3/1 of the fiscal year, just in the same fashion as it is now. Debt service is payable on your issues 9/1 and 3/1, 9/15 and 3/15 for all 7 of those issues. So it's semi-annual now, and it'll be semi-annual after this transaction. There's no acceleration of interest, there's no borrowing, there's no unfunded debt that is involved in this particular transaction.
Well, wait a minute. If, on Schedule 5, this is your 9/1 payment schedule, and you have under unrefunded debt, the debt that supposedly is outside this transaction, there's $32 million left that's left unrefunded. But as I went through the sheets, it didn't matter how much principal was being left unrefunded. The June 15th transaction and that $3 million, at least a portion of that, is being used, it says, to pay all of the interest due through to 9/1 on our existing debt. And then the debt service schedule is showing what's coming due from June 15th to September 1 under the 2 new bonds, correct?
I call your attention to Schedule 5 of our original report.
Right.
Unfunded debt service,
Right.
unrefunded debt service. The first payment that is due is 3/1 of 2000, and that represents the interest payment that is now due on 3/1. Because of, on Schedule 6, we're saying that $32 million was not refunded. So that the total $40,743,000 represents principal and interest on the $32 million that wasn't refunded.
That's what I meant. You were paying on June 15th, principal and interest against the unrefunded debt? Is that what you're saying?
No. The debt service continues as it's normally scheduled. It is not the amount on all issues that is due on 9/1 will be paid from the escrow accounts that are established. The amount of debt service going forward from 3/1/2000 out to the final maturity 9/1/2010 will be repaid as it currently is required to be repaid from transfers from the general fund.
I think now I understand you. You're basically saying what I thought I read from here, but in a different way. Out of 3.6 million, approximately 3 million of it is going into an escrow account to pay future debt service. Correct?
All of the amounts that are listed on Schedule 1 of our report that start with uses of 1993 AA all the way down to 1997. Those amounts are going into escrow accounts that will be used to repay the principal amount and the interest that's due through the call date on each one of those individual issues. So there'll be escrow accounts that will be set up for those issues, and they will be repaid, they will be used to repay those issues, so that that debt will no longer be debt of the school district.
So there's $590,000 that are straight issuance costs. And if I understand you right, we will be making additional interest payments against the debt that's been placed in escrow, but it'll be coming from the escrowed funds that have been used to refund these bonds on June 15th.
The principal and interest that's invested in Treasury securities will be used to pay off the old issues. And no school district funds will be required for those issues that are refunded.
One last question, I'll let Reba go, because I know she's trying to understand this too. When we leave the table and we have our bond, our audit done in June 30th, the end of this fiscal year, are we going to have $5.2 million higher principal debt, or is that being somehow offset through any of this? Will it be 88.8 million?
The amount of the new issue will be just under 62 million. The amount of the old issue that's to be refunded will be 56.7, so that there will be a net nominal addition to your principal amount. But also in that same audit report, you will see interest added to it on an annual basis. And the amount that you'll see that is due for total principal and interest, the debt service on the district, will not be substantially different than what it is now. And the comparison is on Schedule 5 of our report of last week.
Mr. Shelley?
So our debt is going to remain the same?
The debt service, yes.
Debt service, there's going to be no increase at all, and it's the same period of time too?
Within a $5,000 variation, one way or the other.
Okay.
But bottom line, it'll remain the same.
But we get $1.6 million up front.
In cash at settlement. That has to be used for capital projects.
Can it, no, you can't use it, you can use it for debt service though, right? But my understanding is correct also?
My understanding is that you would be safer on Internal Revenue Service grounds if you used it for capital projects and then used other monies to pay debt service.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Mr. Allen?
Can we turn it to Schedule 5, please?
Of the original report?
The one that's part of tonight's agenda.
Okay.
In my simple head, this sums it up for me in a lot of ways. And I want to ask you a couple of questions, if I could. If I understand correctly, I'll start rattling this stuff off. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're not adding any years to our debt service.
That's correct.
Okay. And according to the second column in from the right, that's our additional cost up until the year 2017 of doing this transaction, which is about $1,100 additional cost over the span of the next
Well, you can read that
18 years.
the positive number is savings, so you'll actually be reducing it.
Okay, so that's, whatever it is, it's an insignificant number. As you're asking, or not asking, but as you're presenting this to us, if we look at this as trying to be the stewards of the public monies, are we increasing our risk in any way of interest rate variations, or any other risk that we're putting the money to that is not currently being borne by the current bonds?
No, as soon as you receive the bond purchase proposal and accept it, everything is fixed. The interest rates are fixed, the costs are fixed, the escrow accounts are fixed. Everything is locked in as of that date.
As a tax exempt organization, is it a concern to us whether our yearly debt service has variations as to how much is principal and how much is interest?
The only thing that you would have to be concerned about is under the Local Unit Government Debt Act, there are debt limits which you can incur for bond issues without going to the voters for approval. And that's determined by a borrowing base calculation, which is then, the borrowing base is then multiplied by 2.25% to determine the absolute number of bonds that you can issue. So that if the question is, should you be concerned about the principal amount of your issue? Yes, to the extent that you're bumping up against your bond limit. I hasten to add that the bond limit is for non-electoral debt, and there is no debt, there is no limit for debt that's approved by the voters.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Are we close to our borrowing limit?
I'm not aware that you are close to it.
Don't we have 250,000, 253?
Yeah, but Act 50 may have an effect on that. I think there was
Yeah, but
something in the Act 50.
We're only adding $5 million approximately, is that correct?
Yes, and then as soon as you adopt the budget for next year, the $6 million is wiped off.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So I'm trying to look for the downside of doing this, as far as risk, as far as costs, as far as length of debt, service. And if I'm understanding, there are no downsides of the questions I've asked.
No.
And the upside is $1.5 million, give or take.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Shapinsky.
I just want to clarify a couple of different options you presented on Schedule 5. Under Option 2, the cost to call the tax-exempt bonds, and the difference from what the actual principal is on your schedule to the new principal is $2.85 million difference. That's the cost to call. Would you call that like an early redemption fee?
I wouldn't call it an early redemption fee because sometimes bonds have a premium call. In other words, you have to pay the bondholders 101%, 102%. All of your issues are callable at their face value or 100%. But the difference between the two is the amount of money that you have to put away on day one, such that it's invested at the restricted yield that the IRS says it has to be invested at no higher than. You have to put away a certain amount of money to take care of that debt service. And it's that investment process that gives rise to the increase in the deposit to the escrow account versus the bonds outstanding.
The reason why I asked, I did the calculation on what it cost to call, I'll use that phrase, on the Option 1, which was $3,030,000. If I just do the tax exempt, the cost to call is $2.85 million. So there's a $180,000 cost to call difference between Option 1 and Option 2. That $180,000 nets us another $800,000 at settlement. Is that wrong in that formula? Because that's the math that matches from your schedule.
Now, you focused on another benefit of Option number 1, in that because some of the bonds are issued taxable, they're not restricted in their yield, so that your cost of call is lower with taxes.
Okay. I mean, I brought that point up because I thought for the difference of $180,000 more in the cost to call, and we can net ourselves another $800,000, seems like a pretty fair deal under Option 1 compared to Option 2. The other question I had, on the original document he sent us, which was Schedule 6, I believe, or no, actually, yeah, it is Schedule 6. No, it's Schedule 6. I'm sorry, it's Schedule 5. It's the original comparison, present value. Did he have a cost factor, like 3%, 4% is what the present value formula was?
Normally, present value is based upon what's known as the arbitrage yield. And without checking with the individual who ran these numbers, in most cases, it's done at the arbitrage yield, which in this case is 4.36%.
Yeah, I think it's 4.37.
I like Option 1. We get a little bit greater benefit anytime we do an advance refunding, no matter what it is, we pay a fee or a cost to call. If there isn't any increased risk and the debt service stays the same, and we can raise $1.6 million without having to go back to the taxpayers and tax them twice for the money, I think it's a pretty fair deal. Thank you.
Okay, members of the audience, any questions in regards to this specific item on the agenda? Any questions? Okay, Mr. Moynihan, thank you very much. You're pretty strident there with those answers.
Thank you.
We have tax committee report.
It's me. This is going to be very brief.
Have you got any questions? I mean, she said she.
I did have a couple questions. When you said audience, I didn't take your message. Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
I'm a little unclear on your Schedule 5 in the first packet. I didn't quite understand why the September 99 unrefunded debt service, there's nothing there. Could you explain that to me?
Yes, that's one of the techniques in this transaction that helps generate the savings. What we're attempting to do is to repay the high-cost taxable bonds as rapidly as possible. So by using that debt service to accomplish that end, we generate more savings. So the unrefunded debt service, there is none. Everything that is due on 9/1 or 9/15, all of it is going to be refunded because that enhances the savings.
Oh, okay, so then there's no payment at that point in time on the unrefunded, that's why it's flagged.
That's correct.
And then on your supplement, the option number 3, could you explain that also over a little bit more detail?
In certain circumstances with refundings, there is not a need for the $1,600,000. There are not the capital projects, but there is the desire to capture the savings and reduce annual debt service. Going back to the mortgage analogy, it's the same as if you had a 7% mortgage and now you're able to refinance it at 6%. Your total principal and interest that you're going to pay on a monthly basis is going to be lower. And that's what's happening with option number 3, that the principal plus the interest, and it's a lower interest rate than what is currently existing, gives rise to the annual savings. Just the same it would be as a monthly savings if you refinanced your mortgage at a lower rate. So that with the lower issue, you're not borrowing, you do not have an additional $1,600,000, and you have savings each and every year of approximately $150,000.
Totaling $2.4 million
Yes.
for the whole 18 years or so.
Yes.
And the present value then would be 1.093.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All righty. Tax committee report, Mr.
Tax
Monahan,
committee.
thank you very much. Donald?
Thank you.
Yes, when that was put on the agenda, I thought there was going to be some other action, but let me tell you where the tax committee is right now. We've been meeting 2 or 3 times a month regarding the new tax law 50. We believe we have gathered all the data and all the information related to the law that's pertinent at this time. So what we're attempting to do now is pull all that information together into a report, and then put in a report that would be available to the board, would be presented to the board, and also be available to the community. And from this report, the committee then would make a recommendation to either put it to the board, to either have it put on the ballot for voter selection or not. The reason it's on the work session here tonight was, well, to fill you in, and also because there may be a cost and I'm sure there will be some cost associated with putting this report together. This cost, I believe, will not exceed probably $3,000, but maybe way under that number. We're looking at somebody probably doing it for us in that frame, but we're thinking about pulling it more in-house now and doing it in-house to a large degree, and that cost may be reduced. So it's just an information item to the board. It won't be an action item on Thursday, but I want to make you aware that maybe in the future, that may be requesting some money for the committee, but not at this time.
Very good. Before we move out of finance, I need direction from the board for next Thursday's action meeting in regards to the presentation this evening. Does anybody, we need to build some consensus here or not? Starting with Mr. Mosey?
About putting on the agenda for next month?
Correct. That next Thursday.
The bond?
Yes.
You said we have to make a decision until July.
I like to put it, I would like to put it on the agenda, so we can give him approval to move forward.
Okay.
Which means we make a decision as soon as they can work up the numbers.
Right.
But to start the process.
But absolutely, that's what I'm looking for.
Right.
To start the process. Paperwork.
I'm in favor of it.
Around? Okay, we have consensus. All righty, very good. Ms. Liberowski, add that to next Thursday's agenda. Educational Services, Dr. Hassler.
Okay. Tonight we have a report on our, well, it's actually threefold wrapped into one. I'm going to give an overview of some of the things that we feel that we need to do in addition to what we're working on currently in our assessment program. We'll also give an overview on the state regulations, the Chapter 4 regulations that tie into the PSSA test, the state assessment system, and an update on our most recent, which was a year ago, PSSA scores. I'm going to move to the podium in order to do this, and I have a few overheads, so if anyone sitting up front wants to move out to the audience or to the side, you can do that while I make a quick move. In your packet, you have the work session presentation agenda, which is this page. And basically what I'd like to talk about tonight is alignment for improvement of academic achievement, a district assessment system that's in place and that we would like to move towards or refine, an overview, as I said, of the Pennsylvania Chapter 4 regulations, the state curriculum regulations, the district PSSA results from 1998, and also a learning management system that I believe needs to be put in place in order to accompany this. As I said, you have the outline and a more detailed outline next to that, attachments, and I have some overheads that I'd like to add to this presentation. I've been in the district 2 years and had a chance to become familiar with our assessment system, our curriculum, and our instruction. When I first came here, I know Dr. Bose charged me with taking a look at becoming more results-driven as a school district and taking a look and using data more effectively and efficiently to improve instruction and basically student achievement. In that 2 years, I've come to learn that we have a very good district. But is there room for improvement? There sure is. And that's what I'd like to be talking about and talking about what we'd like to do. As I said, we want to become more data-driven without over-testing, and I think that's important for everyone to understand. When we say more data-driven and using data better, it's not to increase testing and testing of students, but to better use the testing that we have in place. And basically to refocus ourselves on instruction and learning and get a handle on what the program and the system says it will do and also what it's actually doing right now so that we can identify where there's some problem areas where we need to work on. And therefore, eliminating any actual false hypotheses about how good a district we are or where we need to improve. And I think it'll become clear if we work towards that end. Quickly, just some basic premises, and I think these are the types of things that we all believe that school systems should be doing and should have in place and should be monitoring, and that's what is taught in the classroom should reflect what is designed. In other words, what we say we're doing should be happening in the classroom. However, if this is not continuously emphasized and monitored, and we provide opportunities for staff to talk about this, sometimes it may drift a little bit, and we need to bring it back into place. Secondly, what we test or what we assess in the classroom should reflect what's taught, or better yet saying, what is designed to be taught. In other words, if we're asking students to be able to analyze and synthesize information, that's what we should be teaching. We shouldn't give a test and expect them to be able to pull that out of the air. So we want to make sure that what we're saying we're doing, we are doing, and that's what we're testing. Thirdly, assessment or test results should be used to improve instruction, programs, and learning. And we're utilizing that, such as the PSSA, the Goal 1 finals, and also unit tests and weekly tests. And then finally, assessment and test measures should be linked or correlated to provide really a clear picture of what's happening. And what I mean by that is taking the state tests and linking them to what teachers do every day in the classroom and what they test. Before I go any further, though, it's important to make sure that I am not painting a picture that this district needs to start at square one, or that these things aren't in place. We do have controls in place, we do have practices in place, but I think there's areas that we certainly can improve and refine and kind of rejuvenate what we've done. And to that end, I'd like to just talk quickly about what is in place in order to do this. We do have a curriculum development cycle, that's a 5-year cycle, that provides an opportunity for us to review curriculum, change curriculum, update curriculum, but it doesn't automatically mean we're going to replace curriculum. We do have a Goal 1 curriculum, the written curriculum, outlining what students should be learning. We do have what we call Goal 1 tests at the secondary level. Those are the final tests that are written to match our curriculum. We do have, obviously, and are required to give the PSSA, the state tests. We also give Stanford achievement tests. And there's various other data in the district, such as attendance, dropout rates, class size, etc. We also have classroom assessments or tests. These are the tests that teachers give in the classroom, day in and day out. And we have other opportunities, such as our opportunities in curriculum, such as our district writing guide that provides a picture for what teachers and what the curriculum is about. However, there's some next steps I think we need to take, and that is to give more of a voice to data, to use the data that we have to better evaluate how we're doing and become more data-driven. And from, I think, studying other school systems and going to conferences and listening to what other districts do, I don't think a great percentage of districts take this next step. They have certain things in place, but I think there's a lot that I think 99% of the districts don't do. And why don't they do this? Because it's hard work. It's asking staff to kind of roll up their sleeves, take a look at what's in place, continuously evaluate what's in place, and not just change program to change program to be, so to speak, quote, on the cutting edge. It's taking a look at what's written, sitting down and saying, are we doing it? Are we achieving what we say we're doing? And if not, let's improve that. And in my experience from working in a number of districts and working with other districts, this isn't something districts work continuously at or don't work, in my estimation anyway, hard enough at. And I think that's what we want to make sure that we're doing here. And basically, what do we need to do? We need to go back and review and revise, and as I said before, rejuvenate what's in place. Don's been very helpful in talking about our Goal 1 tests, which are intended to do that. And we need to go back and revisit and make sure they're doing that. There's a lot of work that this district put into developing these Goal 1 tests over the years that would match the curriculum. Teachers would give the tests, analyze the data, make changes to the program, and we also need to make changes to instruction if we're not getting what we need to get. We also need to refocus and coordinate, and I'll say standardize what we're doing, so that at 3rd grade, all 3rd grade students are being assessed on the curriculum that's intended for 3rd grade, and that we have a system that becomes more coordinated, and not every individual teacher is making up a test. And I'm not saying that that's occurring throughout the district, but that's something that we know we need to pull together a little bit more in some areas. And I think we need to go beyond what's in place. We need to develop an internal assessment system to track student progress from unit tests to final exams to the PSSA tests. In other words, align everything so that everything connects, so that as we look at data, we have a good sense that here's where we're at, here's where we need to improve. When students take the PSSA in 5th grade, we know what we need to do in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, until they take the test again in 8th grade and have a better feel of how they're progressing. And finally, align what's in place, as I said before, aligning all the tests that we do currently give and making a better and stronger connection. Just quickly, why do we need to do these things? Because the research says this will have the greatest effect on student learning. And I put a chart on here that comes out of the research that compares different things that school districts do. And basically what it shows, it's called a sigma chart, and it shows the positive effect of different things that schools can do. And they're all pluses except for the learning styles at the bottom. But it basically says that if you do number 1, align what you're doing and say you're doing, you'll get the greatest effect of all the things that are listed there. And that's that rolling up your sleeves, taking a look at your curriculum, make sure that what you have written is what is happening in the classroom, is being assessed, and you're using that data to improve. If you go down the list, you'll look at new curriculum down at the bottom, which is a 0.3, which is a positive. But if we get ourselves caught up in thinking that as we adopt new programs, that alone is going to improve what we need to do, that's wrong. It's not wrong, but you're not going to get the greatest effect. If our administration and the school board needs to put dollars where things are most effective, you get a bigger bang for your dollar, obviously, in doing the first thing that's up there. And I'm just saying that's what we need to continue to do, use our staff development time to do that. And in talking to the staff, they agree too, and that's what they want to focus on. It doesn't mean all those other things aren't good. You need to do those too, but you can't get caught up on just adding new programs, et cetera. You need to make sure that what's in place is good and it's working. Why also? And this is the accountability issue, to provide logical and sound evidence of student achievement for public accountability. We all know that the PSSA tests are high-profile tests. They're how people judge our school district. And therefore, if they are, we need to make sure that our district is aligned in order to affect the results as we want to affect them. And what I mean by this is, and I gave a little example, we give the PSSA tests in February. And let's use an example in reading in 11th grade. And that's the 11th graders. In May and June, when those 11th graders move on to 12th grade, we start developing our goals for the following year. We would like to base them on the PSSA results, but we don't have them yet. And in September, when we have the bulk of our in-service and we're finalizing our goals for the coming year, we still don't have our PSSA results. But that's how we're evaluated as a district, as people read the paper. So the school year begins, and in about November, the test results arrive. And then we, in a sense, scramble to use those, in addition to what we've talked about in buildings, to come up with our goals to improve the scores from the previous year. Now remember, that 11th grade class moved on to 12th grade, and now we're looking at goals for the upcoming 11th grade based on last year's 11th grade. And we may or may not be on target, and that's why I talk about an internal system that would align and give us a better picture. In addition to this, we all agree that this PSSA test is good. It measures what we feel is important for students to learn. But we need more in addition to that. And then November through February, we develop and we go on and we work on those goals. And each of the buildings this year has worked on student achievement goals. We can't control the testing dates, we can't control the return of the information or the publicity that's attached to that. So it's important for us to be able to work internally and make sure that what we're doing also aligns to this. Also, what we're going to do is provide information for internal programmatic decision making. We should be making recommendations based on data, student achievement. When do we need a new program? Why do we need a new program? What in the existing program is good? So the more we use data, the more that we can talk about do we need to change things? Do we need to improve things? And that's why, coupled with our curriculum cycle, this would be a better way of looking at our programs and how we change them. We also need to, when we talk about organizational things such as class size, grouping methods, teaming, base it on data. And what does the data say? And if we make this change, will it give us what we think we're proposing that it will? And also affect our staff development and performance factors. And then finally, to provide information for teachers, and this is probably the most important thing to use in their classroom on a day-to-day basis, so that they can really, in a sense, create a coaching-like condition. I think we all know that good coaches don't wait till we play the entire season before they make adjustments to what they do. They make adjustments on the practice field from day to day. They make adjustments between games. They make them during games. They make them all the time. But the way the PSSA is set up, it doesn't give you that opportunity. And what we're talking about is, again, taking the data that we have in our district and provide that same kind of opportunity for our teachers in the classrooms and give them good, clear data in order to take a look at the programs. Dave and Betty are going to talk and segue into what the curriculum regulations ask us to do and also some of our results. But I think it's important for you to know that when I talk about improving and strengthening our assessment system, it's because it's just good education. It's not because the state says you need to do this. It's because we all feel that we want to improve achievement, and we can improve achievement. I think North Penn has always been known as a high academic district, and it still is, but we all feel that we can even do better than what we're doing. And that's why we need to take the next step and focus on an internal system. So Dave and Betty will talk a little bit about what the state is saying about our results, and then I'll close briefly with what I think we need to do to develop that system. And I'll say that this isn't something that costs a lot of money. It's not something that requires new programs. It just requires us to focus on saying, are we getting what we say we want to get and do, and develop programs and assessments to do that. So Betty?
Thank you. As Dr. Hassler has indicated, there are several assessments already in place which provide data for us. But tonight, Dave and I want to focus primarily on PSSA because it is a high-profile test, and it is a test that the state has generated to help school districts look at where curriculum is and how curriculum is being implemented, as they also relate to the standards that the state has set. Most of you are aware that there are standards in the areas right now of reading, writing, and mathematics across the grades, and the assessments take place in grades 5, 8, and 11 presently. But what's most important from the perspective of PSSA is that a school district look at it as one measure of how the school district is performing, not the total measure. It is an instrument that helps us look at data over time, and I think that that needs to be kept in perspective. You can't look at 1 year's scores and panic, nor can you become too jubilant, because those scores are just one snapshot, and Dave will talk about that in more detail. But the PSSA assessments, as we know them, and as Dr. Hassler has indicated, we do believe that they are good assessments and that they are worthwhile assessments for our students. But the purpose is to determine the achievement levels of Pennsylvania students in those fundamental or basic skills of reading, writing, and mathematics, and to provide results to schools and school districts to provide a basis for improving student learning and for revising existing programs as necessary. And as stated earlier, it's not a question of taking an assessment and trying to teach the assessment, because you can't teach the PSSA test. But what you can do is prepare students for that by aligning the curriculum to what is in the assessment. Most of you who have students in those grades know that you do receive a score from the state, and that the scoring can range anywhere from 800 to 2,000. The state average, Dave will talk about, but typically is about in the 1,300 range, and North Penn typically exceeds the state average in the PSSA test. What I think is most important with PSSA is that we understand how to use the results, how to use the data to help us improve as a district and continue to move towards becoming results-driven.
I'd like to start by thanking our financial experts for setting us up tonight to review data, and as this will seem easy and relatively compared to the first half an hour of the discussion, so we'll start with that reference. I'd like to continue with the discussion talking about the Chapter 4 regulations, and if you're looking at the handout, Chapter 4 is this instrument that the state has now imposed in a way, but developed over time, that are our curriculum regulations, and will direct our efforts in aligning our curriculum, assessments, and instruction. There are a couple of highlights that I'd like to point out about these new regulations. They are new to us. They're not dramatic in change, but they do set before us some standards that will really serve as the basis for development of our curriculum. So in the handout, unfortunately, there aren't page numbers. The heading for the page I'd like to refer to is called Finalized Chapter 4 Regulations, Final 4. In that, there are some things we'd just like to point out. One is that we now have reading, writing, listening, and mathematics regulations. They're in force as of January 6th. So that's the order of business for us to comply with those. We like these regulations, so this isn't a bad process for us. However, we need to go about that process of aligning what we currently do, referring them to what the state has identified as standards. Good news is, PSSA is going to be aligned with these standards as well. In the past, the test was generated on anticipated standards that the state did not yet have at that point. So that makes more sense in this alignment process. The one at which Dr. Hassler pointed out will have the greatest payoff. That's part of the alignment. Also of interest in that, if you're looking at that chart, are the fact that a number of other standards in each one of the content areas, other important content areas, will be created by the state over the next year. You see the timeline listed there for the creation of additional standards. So for us, that gives us a reference point with our development of curriculum. Other important components of this Chapter 4 regulation include the new graduation requirements that for our current 8th graders, and this is new in Pennsylvania, for our current 8th graders, there will be a proficiency requirement to graduate in the areas of reading, writing, and mathematics. Now, they can attain that proficiency either on the state tests, given in 11th grade, or by district-generated assessments. But for us, that changes the profile of this test considerably. When we refer to the results that are in place now, students have varying degrees of interest in performing well on these tests, especially at the 11th grade level. Those that are parents of 11th graders might know what I'm talking about. However, as the stakes are raised considerably, we feel that the scores and also student interest in creating proficient scores will change considerably. So that's a state of affairs that, well, that's just the way it's going to proceed anyway. Additionally, other interesting aspects of the Chapter 4 regulations include some components of an assessment system that is very consistent with the introduction to this component of the talk tonight.
I think another important piece about PSSA is as the state learns more about giving feedback, timely feedback to school districts, and also about when to assess. In the year 2000, I believe it is, the testing time period will change to the spring, and hopefully we'll be able to get those results back before the school year begins. As Dr. Hassler said, there's been quite a delay in our getting that information, but there is an urgency, I think, as the stakes are raised with PSSA, that school districts know they need to have that data back as soon as possible. Some of you may be wondering, why is the state raising the stakes, and why is the state now on such a push with this effort of standards? Many of you know that the public schools have come under some scrutiny for a long time, and nationally, the schools have been looked at more closely in terms of, are we truly preparing our students? for what we see as the 21st century. Because of that, there's a movement across this country and definitely in the state of Pennsylvania to create standards for students, ways in which we can measure, ways in which schools, the 501 districts in Pennsylvania can measure and say, yes, when we graduate these students, we can almost assure the public as well as the businesses that are out there that we are graduating students who are proficient in areas that are needed, that are necessary as they go into the work world. So the standards movement really is saying that we have expectations now for our students, and they're for all students. And it does not matter what the ability level is. The state is saying all students must be taught to those standards, toward those standards, and every student must be given an opportunity to meet those standards. The advantage of having standards, and I think if you put yourself in the place of a student in a classroom today, when you walk into a classroom, the first thing you want to know is, how do I get a good grade in this teacher's classroom? That's simply what standards is saying. It's saying, here's what you need to do to show proficiency. I'm going to tell you up front what it is I expect, and then I'm going to hold you to that by giving you an assessment. That's the PSSA, just one form of it. That's the most simplified version I can give of it. And I think that when you know ahead of time what it is you need to do in order to be successful, you have a better chance of being successful. And so simply put, that's what the standards are trying to say, that we need to hold our students accountable, we need to hold our schools accountable, we need to be able to say to the public that when we produce this product, we can produce it with as much assurance as possible that we are graduating students who know how to read, who know how to write, who are literate, who are ready to move into the global economy that we know the 21st century is going to bring. I think if you look at the handout that talks about an introduction to standards for Pennsylvania schools, and look at the second paragraph that talks about what happens when you have those standards clearly in place, what happens is that those curriculum regulations, Title I, IDEA for special needs, everything is linked together. Everybody is moving toward a common goal. So that across this system of North Penn schools, we know that our students are all being given the same challenges, and the accommodations are being made that are necessary to help them, again, perform proficiently on that test. Dave indicated that beginning in the year 2002-2003, students are going to have to demonstrate that proficiency. And one of the things that will behoove us as a school district to do is give students more and more opportunities to have performance-based assessments in the classroom so that those tests are not a surprise when our students meet them.
We'd now like to move on to a review of some graphs that represent the results from the most recent PSSA testing. Ironically, these tests are now to be returned to the states and have just been completed by our students and are in the process of being shipped to the state. As Dr. Hassel pointed out, we can expect to return sometime in November. So we have a long wait period of time from the time they're given, which was within the last 2 weeks, and to the return of those results, which happens much later in this year.
David, could we ask questions now, or do you want to hold to the end?
I think our approach is to go through this package and then field answers at the end of it. We've created graphs that represent our reading, our writing first, secondly, our reading results, and then thirdly, the math results from the 1998 testing. So as a reference point, these are tests that were given to current seniors, last year's 11th graders, and you can do the subtraction for their other grade levels, but they're basically given a year ago, these tests. These results are not news to you. You've seen them published in the paper. We have not presented them formally in this setting before, so that's one of the reasons we're doing that tonight. The graphs represent the difference between the previous, or this 1 years of testing in grades 6 and 9 in writing, and also included with that are the state results, the average scores. One thing to keep in mind for a graph like this, it tends to pronounce differences. If you would look at the scale, it doesn't begin at 0. And so it's fair to analyze these when you visualize this graph or look at the way it does appear, to recognize that it pronounces differences. That's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. So if you just page through these, you can see, in plain black and grays and other colors, the scores from last year's testing in the areas of reading, writing, and math. I just would like you to take a look at those. Visually, you can see the differences between them. And if you would page to a chart, continue turning pages, a chart that represents the last 4 years of data, not in graphical form, but in chart form, would be a reference point for a bit of a brief discussion. One thing we'd like to look at is test data over time. For results that appear for a given year, we're wondering what the cause and effect may be. It may be our instructional program, it may be the attitude of the students taking the testing, it may be a blip on the screen. For us to be able to evaluate our program analytically, fairly, we need to look at this data over time, and so we're beginning to see patterns here, potential patterns of true analysis, or anomalies in the testing sequence or the score sequence over time. This is one component of the assessment program. That's another important consideration, that as we build an assessment program that has consistency in both the curriculum and the assessments that correspond to that, we'll be giving better meaning to this and be able to predict, in a way, what we would expect those results to be like, because we have classroom assessments, district-wide assessments, that are consistent with this format. Other interesting aspects of this, sometimes are difficult to tell the differences or analyze the differences. In some cases, or a big portion of these scores are in the top 15% of the state on our scores. Others are not. So, but for the most part, our scores simply are clearly above average, consistently above average. On the next page, you'll see a couple comments regarding the analysis of this. So simply put, and without any reservation, we can say our scores are above average and don't depart from that. We have language arts program that we feel will lead to results that correspond with this, because we feel that that new program is more in alignment with what the state is expecting and also what we believe our students should be achieving. Some of the components of the math program are listed there that currently, even though we're in the ending period of our curriculum process in the mathematics area, we continue to advance that program by concentrating on certain aspects, such as writing in mathematics, and that's an area that we are emphasizing continuing with our current curriculum. And writing is a responsibility of every teacher, continues to be that, and so we emphasize those writing skills and hope that is represented in our students' understanding.
Thanks, Dave and Betty. Let me close quickly by saying, outlining briefly what I think we need to do to continue this movement, and also what we are doing. As you heard, there's a delay in results. You look at the results and you wonder, well, what the heck is the district doing if we're not where, or you think we need to be? So for lack of a better term, and I've been warned, don't call anything anything, because when you call something something, it becomes a program, but I need to put something up there. So it's a learning management system. We're not controlling the minds of students. We want to improve learning is the basic thing, and become more results driven. And let me explain what we're doing to that end, and what I think we need to do. When you looked at this chart, this one from 5th grade over the years, from 5th grade to 8th grade, etc. One of the concerns we have is that we want to have a better system in place so that when we see where we are in 5th grade, we can help those students and work in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and when the test comes in 8th grade, we don't look at them and say, oh, okay, it worked or it didn't work. We want to know and be able to track a better system as we move on. And that's why I feel we need to revisit and rejuvenate what's in place. As I said, there's a lot of good things in place. We just need to tie them together a little bit more closely. Dave said it's one data point. We look at PSSA, that's not the beginning and end all of this district. There's SAT scores, there's the class score, tests that are given day to day, there's dropout rates, there's discipline. What we're intending to eventually be able to give you is a package that would provide all that data for you at one time. It's hard when we bring the Stanford test to you and give you those results one time of the year, PSSA at another time, dropout rate at another time, and you kind of bounce back and forth and you can't get a total picture of what the district looks like. So we would like to add that. And when I talked about the internal assessment system, that's just aligning what we already have in place. It's not changing everything, but it will allow us to be able to track students from 5th grade, 6th grade to 7th grade, 8th grade, et cetera, a little bit better. But we have a lot of that in place. We all know that Montgomery Elementary had the highest reading score in Pennsylvania this year. Now, are we certain that that'll happen next year? When you look at the scores over the last X number of years, they had a 1550, a 1380, a 1420. I guarantee you that teachers didn't teach any less from one year to another. The curriculum didn't change, but you'll see these blips sometimes. Sometimes it's a different group of students. That's not an excuse. Sometimes what would help us better understand that is if we had this system that would help us from grade level to grade level to grade level to better know where we're at. At the high school this year, I think we saw our reading scores in 11th grade drop 50 points. And I know Dr. Cotter was upset and concerned, and what can we do? But if we had a system in that could track this, that 50-point drop for a different 11th grade group of students might actually be an increase. They may have been increasing each one of those years, and that's just where that group is right now. So we're not looking for excuses, we're just looking for a better way to monitor. Quickly, what we need to do, PSSA is what we would call a trailing indicator. It gives us like a final result. Kids studied, they took the test, here's your results. That's good, that helps us solve problems. What we need to do is look more at like leading indicators. What's happening prior to them taking the test, such as time on task, how much time are they spending in the classroom, and how do we measure that? And that leads us to the next slide to show you what we're currently doing with each of the buildings throughout the school district. We've asked each building this year to come up with some results-focused goals. They're to analyze the appropriate data. We've used PSSA, we've used other test scores. They're to identify areas for improvement. They're to develop clear and measurable goals. They've established a timeline for collecting data. That's another thing with PSSA. You don't want to wait a whole year before you know if your goals that you developed you're moving towards. So each building has developed a goal, and let's say it's to improve writing, if that's what they felt based on their PSSA. And then incrementally, within, let's say, a month, they take a check and say, where are we? And then monitor, adjust, next month, kind of move on. We're not at a perfect system yet. We've just started this, and it's a new concept for educators. It's not a new concept for business. In a sense, it's a new concept for educators to kind of check from time to time to see where we're at, rather than wait a whole year to take the test again. And that would allow us to implement, monitor, et cetera, and evaluate progress. Let me just quickly run through these slides and show you what we've asked the teachers, the buildings to do. Each building has a student achievement goal that's linked to the PSSA, that's based on their results for their building. Next one, each building has a technology goal. This goal is a more common goal in a sense. It's not linked to the PSSA, it's to support the technology adoption this year. So we had the 13 elementary principals sit together and develop goals together that if we're putting 4 computers in every 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classroom, what do we expect to see in each one of those buildings to support the program? So each building has that. And then, knowing each building is different, we asked each building principal to sit down with their staff and come up with what we call a building department goal. In other words, in your building, what are the types of things that your staff feels that needs to improve? Most of the time it's strengthen or improve the discipline referral process, or involve parents more, or we have just something that's particular to our goal, our building, but again, it's all focused towards improving student achievement. It's not that, geez, we want new something or other for us in the classroom as teachers or administrators. It's tied to student achievement. And I'll close with, if we go to the last slide, Don, this is an example, and I know you can't read it, but I think in a sense it shows the work that the buildings are doing, and we think that it's really going to pay off as we get better at this. This is a goal from, an example of a goal from Bridle Path, is to improve written communication skills by focusing on mechanics, and I think it says content or something to that effect. So that's their overall goal. And each grade level then goes through and says, here's what we're going to do to reach that goal, here's what we're going to do, and it's, good job, Don. I talk faster than you can move it, I guess. But, and the strategies that they'll use, the people who are responsible for it, the resources, and you're going to see there's no financial resources because this is all part of our staff development program. Not to say that there's not money there, it's to say that we're focusing what we already have to support that. So there's no additional financial resources. The timeline and how they're going to evaluate what they're doing. This was our first kind of blush at this year, in a sense. We know there's a lot of revision to do, but I think tying this all together, that we'll better be able to assure the public that we're doing what we need to do to keep academic achievement where it's at North Penn and even improve that for all students at North Penn. Thanks.
Very good.
Okay, let's regroup a minute. Let's keep it Wasn't you? Okay, starting with questions, let me just ask something. Why does instructional alignment sound like educrat lingo for teaching to the test?
Yeah, really.
Did anybody else like?
Yep. Well, let me make a distinction between teaching to a target and teaching the test. This is not teaching the test. It's not giving the students the answers. But I think we're remiss as a district if we don't say, there's the target, let's make sure that what we're doing in the classroom aims us at the target. In other words, it's saying to students that you're going to be required to write a thesis at the end of, let's say, this marking period that's going to include good grammar, research, etc. It's not saying, here's the topic, go home and do it. So it's not giving them the answers. It's just making sure that we're focused and assuring, I think, the public that what we say we want students to do is happening in the classroom. But it's not giving, I would never apologize for teaching towards a target. But what we don't want to do either is cheat and teach the target.
If I may, let me add this. If you think about, and Bob referenced coaching, if you think about someone who is involved in a sport like diving, a diving competition, you can't teach the student or the diver. You can't teach to the point where that person's going to go and know exactly what that person's going to write on their score sheet. But you can teach them the skills that they need to do to perform well. And so you teach them what the coach is, what the judge is looking for. So you say, okay, you have to have your feet together when you go off the board, and you have to do all these different things. That's what you're really teaching them, and then you pull all those skills together. So you're really not, I mean, the PSSA, if you look at it, you can't teach that test to students. First of all, it changes from year to year. You cannot teach it. What you can teach the students are the skills that they need to have to do well in that test.
I get nervous when you guys use athletic.
Coaches
can get fired in the middle of the season, you know?
It's true, but think of it as a coach.
Not if they're successful.
Yeah, not if they're good.
Well, I guess my concern is that the state standards are too low for us, as in some cases we've already proven. I don't even like the state's target by the sounds of it without even knowing exactly where it's to end up. I believe we should be beyond that.
Well,
we shouldn't even be so focused.
One of the things we're doing is just making sure that's what are in the standards is included in our curriculum. We're not asking staff as they sit down and Dave is probably in the middle of this in the area of science. We're not asking staff to take a look at their curriculum and bring it down to meet the standards. I think that's a minimum of what we're expected to be able to do. We're still saying what are the things that we feel at North Penn, in addition to that students need to know. So it's not dumbing down our curriculum to match what the state is, although I don't think when we look at those standards, we're even thinking in a sense sometimes of dumbing down, because the standards are, in our estimation,
They're
pretty high.
pretty ambitious.
But it doesn't.
The states are pretty ambitious?
Oh, yeah, if you take, yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't give the level of achievement or proficiency there, it simply states the
Okay.
standard.
But it doesn't prohibit us for keeping, and our staff, I think, would ensure that. They don't want to eliminate things they feel that are important for students to know.
Well, in all the slides that were just shown, you know, and going through all of them, you know, going through the notes that you provide us with, there seems to be one obvious missing ingredient. There's all this effort to track kids, tests, assessments, et cetera, reevaluations, et cetera, but there's nothing here about teachers. And when the test scores are bad, from time to time, and you have those bumps, how do you know it isn't a teacher?
Well,
Now, this is where I've always had a concern. Look at him smirking back there.
We knew it was coming.
You knew it was Well, then take your coat off. This is going to take a while. He's got it off. I guess what I could never get over is we have 850, 900 teachers, and every year, they're all satisfactory. I don't buy that. The law, it defies the laws of probability that 900 teachers are all satisfactory. I guess I've been here too long. Terry's been here
I
too
agree.
long.
I
We can
agree.
tell you the ones that,
And if you can show us a sigma chart, you know how to do the probability.
well, I think
something's not right.
that's over here. I think if you put a system, no, it's over here. I'm saying if you put a system in place like this, and I've worked in a system where this was in place, where as a fourth grade teacher, I got my results back compared to every other fourth grade teacher. That was pretty self-correcting for me to say, whoa, I'm pretty good, or I missed the boat somewhere. And that, in conjunction with working with administrators, if a teacher is having difficulty, would address that. But I think, looking at it from a positive angle, what it'll do, just to put it in place, you'll have teachers looking at that, and they'll make corrections more that way than right now where we don't have that in place. And if we need to work with somebody, then we work with somebody. But I wouldn't want to attack it with a hammer and say we need this in place because we want to get rid of you, unless.
No, we might want it in place because if it's going to be performance-based diplomas, it should be performance-based pay for teachers. And while we're putting all this little design of assessments together for our kids, down here at the base level, we can start putting the same kind of assessments together for teachers that will help us. Next contract, 2001, go Knights.
Wait, no.
Anyway, questions to the right, Mr. Schilling.
No, we can.
Mrs. Sherman.
No, we had a great discussion at the educational committee, and I think it's good to see those performance-based criteria come through. The one issue that's out there is really over those seals. I mean, it seems to me the answers really aren't there right now, are they, Betty, anyway?
Yeah.
Not
So-
totally.
The seals of proficiency?
We only know what they've reported in the Chapter 4 regs. We haven't gotten much beyond that, and I think that school districts are going to have to grapple with those questions.
So we'll get updated on that at another time?
As we get more information, we'll be sure to share it with you.
Okay.
Mr. Allen.
Will there be a way for parents to know and follow the progress of their children through all this testing and evaluation? It seems it's going to be more continuous throughout their career now. So will there be a way for the parents to know that their child is struggling all the time in a particular area or doing well, and we can follow children better than what we can do now?
A couple things that are on the forefront for how, for one, the PSSA is progressing and also our response to that. You heard the reference to the standards. The PSSA test is now more organized about that, so it just makes more sense. The scores that will be reported to parents will now include the standards and the relative performance against those standards. So you'll see the element and you'll see a performance there. Right now, if you're a parent receiving a score, you get two numbers. You get a percentile score, which many people understand, and a scaled score, which most people don't understand. That's it. So you might say 79th percentile and a score that's in this domain in here that you've seen reported, 1250. That's what you get now. As a parent, not especially informative about what your child can do and can't do. So this progression as well for schools to receive that about the performance of its students against standards will help inform us. In addition to that, the Chapter 4 regulations, now I'm talking about imposed regulations, but in a way we think these are systems that make sense for us. The state has asked us to identify students that are not performing as of grade 3, as of grade 8, as of grade 11. So we have the obligation of not only having systems in place to be able to identify those students, but also to do something about it.
And I think in addition to that, you might recall that the report cards that the elementary teachers developed are tied to the standards. So the reporting system, as best we can, knowing what we knew at the time, we'll be able to say to parents, based on the reading standards, here's where your student falls.
Are you expecting to have more standardized tests in the elementary scores? Just internal ones?
I don't think necessarily more standardized tests. I think more performance-based types of tests. And I think maybe we need to take a look at the standardized tests that we use to determine if those tests are giving us the kind of data that is helpful. But that's another discussion.
I think a little different.
I'm sorry.
No.
A little different twist to that is not standardized tests as we know them, the Stanfords, but standardizing what we currently do in our programs, so that we know that at 5th grade.
But the only way to evaluate that is for every child in 5th grade to take the same test, is it not?
And I'm sorry.
Well, if they're, yeah.
But right now, we are doing that when we're moving more toward that in the area of language arts, for example. We give the integrated performance assessments with the new signature series. And working with through the reading department, there is one that is identified that everybody across the district at the elementary grades will be using. So that.
A test?
Yes.
Okay. In each
So-
grade?
Yes, so that
Okay.
we can compare students at school X to students at school Y if we wanted to do that. But more importantly, across the district, we can say everybody took this same IPA, and we can look at the results and see how our students are doing. So it's not a standardized test in terms of.
It's an internal
But it's an
standardized test.
internal,
Internal.
right.
Right.
We've standardized an internal assessment system.
Okay,
that
and
we
we'll do
have.
that in math and some other?
We'd expect to. We have not developed those at this point, but as we go through our curriculum review cycle, you might be aware that math is in the curriculum review cycle process is beginning in phase 1 or the initial stages. So as we get to the point where we're having selected a curriculum and begin to implement like we have in language arts, we'd expect to be doing those same kind of things in the math area, yes.
And actually, in science, with the SAT-9s, with 5th grade students at the elementary level, take the SAT-9s, which gives us some kind of.
Well, if we do that, it seems to me that we would be able to almost, after some years of history, we could almost predict PSSA and see how this group is doing, this 4th grade versus last year's 4th grade, and start comparing things and then adjust as we start to see trends. But
And that would-
if we don't do that internally, before we get there, we don't know how to fix it.
Right. And that's one of the advantages of having the system that Bob is talking about, because we should be able to predict how our students are going to do, instead of playing the guessing game that we've played in the past.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a good
One
idea, by the way.
size doesn't fit all, so how does this work when you have such demographic differences that always seem to appear and show up over 13 elementaries?
Let me give you.
Almost predictably.
Let me
with
give you an
schools.
example of how it can be done. We do have a 5th grade curriculum
Right.
that we expect to be taught in each of the 5th grades throughout the system. Yes, there are some differences, but we want to make sure that the differences and what a teacher does with those differences aren't too wide. So what I've seen is you can have a test that's made up that is 80% the same throughout the district, or 60%, to make sure that we're testing things that we think all students should be able to do, and that teacher would have a 40%, 20% opportunity to keep knocking
You've
this
done
over.
that twice already.
Modify the test as they feel that they need to. But you can go from one extreme to the other. You don't want either someone making up a test just based on what they want to teach. It needs to be a fine balance. We know we work for the district, we need to follow the curriculum, but there needs to be some flexibility to accommodate those differences.
Donald?
Nothing.
still with us?
I'm with you.
Mr. Sherbinsky?
Betty, let me ask you a question. The new evaluation system or student tracking system that you're going to implement to be part of this, is it going to be part of your current system as far as your daily testing, your daily assignment reports, things like that? Or is this going to be a new way to do it above and beyond the normal homework assignments and other projects that the students do?
I'm going to defer to Bob because.
Well, let me ask you then one.
Because I'm not.
We know that we have a problem in certain grades. 11th graders sit down, they take the PSSA, and they don't care because it doesn't have any effect on their grade levels. So they sit down and some guys draw pretty little squares. They do everything and anything, and we're always concerned about how to make them take it serious because it has an effect on us. So my question is, how are you going to make the students take this serious if it isn't part of their regular daily routines and responsibility?
No, what I'm talking about is it would be part of the regular daily routine. So rather than giving, it would just be let's call it a unit test that's given in social studies.
Right.
We're just saying we want to make sure it's standardized from teacher to teacher to teacher. And we don't have 10 teachers teaching a subject and them making up 10 different tests that may assess 10 different things. So, no, it's not building another system on top. It's using what's in place. Because it's used for a grade on the report
Well,
card.
that was my question. If we can use an internal system that, obviously has a direct effect on their own performance, it's a heck of a lot better than sitting them down and just hoping that they're gonna do a great job for us on the PSSA test. Because I know it's been a serious concern for you guys. I know certain schools, when they go into testing, they offer some type of rewards and please take it serious, sit down, they try to hype the kids up to do it. And then we get the 11th graders drawing pictures.
That's my kid.
It's going to make more and more of an impact because of the proficiency requirement that the eighth graders, beginning and eighth grader required to do. Including these scores on transcripts is another thing.
Right.
And those
It's an
are,
option.
and those are areas we need to examine. There are some school districts right now who are beginning to put the scores on transcripts. So it has raised the stakes, and I think that as those students move toward 11th, it will make a difference.
Is this the pictures, 11th graders, is this what you were talking about, Mr. Sherbinsky? Okay. Mr. O'Donnell?
I really enjoyed the presentation, very good. I've given it a name, it's the RDM plan. Results-driven model, it's your RDM plan. Very good, thanks.
Unless it wasn't Pumsy.
That's all. That's it. That's all.
Let's keep that
You're on.
Pumsy out of here.
Isn't that Terry?
I got quite a few.
This could take all night.
It could. Back to your alignment method, the whole thing, the whole process. I really like it. I think it's very good for the kids, for the teachers, especially if we tie it into assessing the teachers as well as the kids, which I had that on my list before she brought it up. But I like the whole refocus and look at it and adjust it and stuff. I like that. The standardized test that you talked about earlier with Mr. Allen, well, we have several versions of a standardized test, so that, like, the same questions in different order or different, several tests for the same grade level, for the same classroom, at the same time, concurrently, you know what I mean?
When we say standardizing our system, what's available are things called test banks. In other words, we can generate our own tests, but they can be done randomly. We make sure, and when I say randomly, here's what you want to assess, and there's
Right.
questions in there, and it randomly gives you a set of questions, so.
So it's assessing the same thing. It may not be in the same order, so that the kid next to you doesn't necessarily need to write down all the same answers.
But again, it's important to know that we're not saying we want to add another layer of tests. We just want to take what's in place and standardize that.
Right.
And
right.
refine it.
Refine it, but not necessarily narrow it down to one test.
Not the internal ones.
The internal one is all I'm
Right.
talking about.
Would not necessarily.
We can modify those, and we have done that.
We can construct those the way we choose
Right.
to do.
Still standardized throughout the district, and you're still assessing all fourth graders the same way, just using different, not necessarily the same order. I can't read my handwriting. Advising third grade performance by individual or by school. I can't remember what I was writing. Anyway.
That's because I got rid of penmanship when we were in elementary, remember that? That's something like civics or something.
On your table that you brushed over, 9498 PSSA. The rating scores went up 80 points between the sixth graders in 94, 95, and the same group of students when they got to ninth grade, 97, 98. And 25 years ago when we went to school, I didn't realize till I got out of high school that the program here stunk. And I needed remediation when I got out of here to learn how to write a sentence. May I? Anyway, when I came on the board in '91, I was very critical of the district and what we were doing and what we had done. And I was very pleased with the progress that we had made because of the whole new language arts program that had come in and what they had done with it. And if you look at these writing scores, you can see that, in my opinion, we're still improving there. My concern is in the reading. If you take your 8th grade in 94, 95, and that same group of kids in 11th grade, which I guess is this year's seniors, right?
That's correct.
It's down 70 points. Now, if that is statistically significant, right?
Anytime we go down.
Should we put phonics back in for everybody?
Phonics,
All of
we're not here for a
everybody?
phonics presentation, but phonics is in our reading program.
Well, a little bit, yeah.
It's in
But
quite a bit. It's
First
in.
three grades.
First
Well, I know, my experience is that, yes, it's kind of in there, and if your kid needs help, they get Title I and then they get it.
Well, I think in response to your question more directly, the way in which the PSSA reading assessments are structured, it isn't about simply your ability to sound out words. It's really about your ability to look at a passage and be able to respond to that passage. And I think that a lot of it goes to the way in which students had been asked in the past to respond to reading questions. More typically, and this would have affected some of those 11th graders when they were down in
Right.
3rd,
Right.
4th, and 5th grade. Reading was taught differently. You know, it was usually those the factual question, inferential question, vocabulary questions, experiential.
Right.
We've learned a lot more about the process of reading over the last few years, and I think that what is happening now is you're looking at asking students to respond to reading prompts, to writing prompts. We weren't doing that 10 years ago. You know, when some of these kids who are now, I guess, 16, 17 years old, 8, 9 years, we were just beginning to understand those differences. So I think you have to wait and look at what's happening with this current group of students who are in elementary school, and let's measure them when they get to 8th grade. I really think that's a big difference.
But again, you bring up a good question, though. I mean, and a good point, because that's what we want to assure from year to year. And if we need to change program, then we change it based on that. If we see that trend happening, we can maybe identify it's either the instruction we need to change, or it's the program we need to change, but we could do it rather than wait the 3 years to say, geez,
Yeah,
what we're doing
and
is not
that's
getting
why I
us what we
think
want.
your alignment program, I think, really has a lot of merit in following and staying with them. I wish I could read what I wrote.
Man.
That's all.
We didn't sting. Wasn't that bad.
I did.
Gee, Mr. Mosley.
Thank you.
I know what it was.
I'm glad,
When-
since you translated what you wrote.
No, it didn't
I translated what she wrote.
I'll
We had
spreadsheet
to,
it.
earlier, one of the comments, you mentioned advising the state of a third grader's performance. Are you advising that by the individual?
the state has charged us with developing a system to identify.
To let them know John Smith?
They're not part of it. They're simply charging us with the responsibility of identifying students that aren't at the, what they call proficient.
Identifying students by name, by class,
Not
by
for
grade,
them,
by
just
school?
No.
For us, so we can intervene.
In other words, really
Okay.
what they're saying
Okay.
is internally, North Penn School District needs to have some type of assessment in place at the
Okay.
third grade level so that we have identified students
Okay.
who may not be proficient and who at the fifth grade, when they get to fifth grade, may
Have
not
they
do well in
changed or
those
have-
tests.
right.
So then we need to take action. That's what they're saying.
Okay.
They're not asking
It's
for
just
names.
helping us help them.
Exactly.
Okay.
The responsibility is on us to do
Right.
something in fourth grade, so that we have to intervene so those students have a better opportunity to be successful.
Right,
When they
okay.
get to the fifth grade PSSA.
But you said that you don't send the name in.
No, oh,
So
no.
the state doesn't have your little third grader in some
They
sort
don't
of
give any names
bank?
of any results at all.
No.
Okay.
The IRS, we're here to help.
That's what I was worried about.
And in fairness to the state with PSSA, up to this point, we would get results for parents, and we would get 3 reports. We would send one to the parents, one to the school, so the teachers would be able to look at the results and analyze the data. And the third report, which was here, we destroyed. So we didn't keep records.
You didn't
over
put 'em
here
in
of
that big
individuals.
database?
No, we didn't put them in that
Person.
database in the sky.
Roll the shredders and what, 99?
Thank you.
Right. They're not in the archives.
Thank you.
Well, not to belabor the point on phonics, but this June will be 39 years ago, I graduated from school, and I still use phonics today. Okay? It was taught when I went to school. It wasn't just first, second, third grade. We had it for like sixth grade. And it's something that I think is an extremely good tool. If you listen to the radio every day, there's a couple of companies out there making a fortune that are selling phonics programs to parents who want their kids to do well, and parents are taking it upon themselves to help their kids do well. I don't think whole language is a successful program.
I do wanna
You're
say-
lost over the fact about you don't want kids to understand, just be able to decipher or interpret or translate a word. Well, I'm sorry, words equal sentences and sentence equals paragraphs, and that's what makes up themes and compositions.
I think an assessment system like this would point out whether the programs are working.
Well, I hope so. I really do, because I think one of the biggest mistakes we made in schools was when they took phonics and tried to isolate it and only teach it at certain times or certain grades. I think it's something that can be used for a lifetime. Obviously, we would have so many reading programs if we, I don't think we had a problem 50 years ago until someone came up with a bright idea, let's go to whole language and do away with phonics, and all of a sudden, we were criticized a couple of years ago when we dropped reading recovery around here because, we had to come up with new programs because students in 5th and 8th grade, whatever, having trouble reading. Well, there had to be a reason. But I'm not going to belabor that point. I wrote it down, and Terry kind of stole my thunder because I saw on your page your analysis of results. Down at the bottom where you put additionally specific writing skills, including mechanics, grammar, spelling, and I didn't see phonics in there, and I thought that was an important component. I, too, questioned a little bit the numbers on the next to the last page, where it actually showed the numbers. Is there a maximum and a minimum a student can achieve on these tests?
Yes.
Is it like the SAT's 1,500 or 1,600?
Actually, it's sort of a funny number. It depends on the test. The scores range from about a minimum of 880 and a maximum of about 2,000.
Would that be
They
in all
say
three
about,
categories,
so
David?
it's not 100%. The way the scaled score is generated, there isn't 100% maximum score.
Would that be in all three categories, mathematics, reading, and writing, would 2,000 be the maximum?
That's correct, but these are school scores. Relative to these, the highest school score this year in the state, 5th grade reading, because we happen to know that one, is 1510.
Okay.
The
Does
highest.
that change every
performing-
year, that floats?
Depends on the school, depends on the population and how they perform.
So
If
that-
every student in that school scored 1,600, it would be 1,600.
Oh, I see.
But the 99% of the school scores range between a score of 1,000 and 1,600 on every one of these tests. That's a good reference point for you. Your score for example, you pick one out of here, because I happen to have a 97 kind of analysis of these things. I was going down the list in the 97, 98, for whatever reason, I don't have that. Our scores are at the 87th percentile, 85th percentile, 92nd percentile, 88th percentile, 80th percentile, 80th percentile, et cetera.
But you don't know what it's 88%, 85,
They're
or
not,
what?
it's a
You don't know.
percentile.
Yeah,
Percentile is a
right,
relative
okay, right.
comparison to
Right.
all of the schools taking the test.
Right.
So you can get just by those numbers that I read out, you can get a perspective of how we compete relative with other schools. We say that's not an important statistic necessarily, though it's of interest to us.
Right.
We want to be able to report progress against the standard,
Yeah.
not just how we compete against other schools.
Okay, but you're saying that as far as the maximum and minimum goes, that kind of floats every year?
It does, but you can, the way statistically this is played out for this test, 1,600 is very much the maximum. No school, or only maybe 0.5% of the schools in the state will score below 1,000 on any of these tests. That's the minimum.
And 800 is the minimum?
Well, for student, I'll show you the.
No, that's okay. No, I'm
But it's
just-
fuzzier than that.
Yeah, I just, would just like to get an idea. It's nice to see 1,400, but are we, you know, if we're doing 1,400 ninth grade results in writing, are we 1,500 at max? Our kids are really that close, or? I was just doing it for comparison, not to belabor the issue. Back to page 1, the overview of the PSA, last paragraph. Third sentence, the writing assessment results are created only at the school level. Could you explain that to me?
Students don't put their names on the writing tests.
That is a state test, though.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right, and we're talking only about the SSA. Currently, the students do not put their names on the writing test. Creates another question as to effort. However, that's the way the test is organized now.
Okay.
That will change as of the implementation of the standards. So students will get information about how they performed. We think that's progress. So when the scores are reported, they're not reported to individuals because.
Just as school?
Just the school.
Oh,
The
okay.
school gets a report that says.
That was kind of ambiguous, that sentence.
And
that's
parents
why.
parents obviously don't receive the reports for writing.
Okay, and then the next topic, fourth line down. Mandate districts to provide special programs for students not achieving the standards at the developing grades, and will require all students to reach the proficient level of performance in these areas before graduating. Well, that sounds like OBE to me. I know we had this discussion a year ago, but it really does.
What it is minimum proficiency.
Yeah, no.
These are those standards.
But we're talking about, you know, setting up special programs and so forth.
Well, this is what we talked about when we said we need, as a district, to identify third grade students who are having difficulty in reading.
Okay.
So it may be that we need to restructure what we currently do in
We're not
reading.
talking about, because when I
So
see
it doesn't
mandate,
necessarily mean we have to.
when I see mandate coming from the state, you know, I get a little nervous. That means dollars and they give us nothing.
Maybe a different choice of words.
Also, the next page, establish seals of proficiency and distinction for those qualifying. I understand this, we're gonna have 2 diplomas?
Seals go on the diploma. Student is granted a diploma. These are current 8th graders. when
Right,
this is implemented.
but one will be for proficiency and one will be distinction?
You get the diploma if you do your coursework and you do the other requirements for this, and you demonstrate proficiency in reading, writing, and math. That gets you diploma. If on the 11th grade exam, you score at a level proficient on those 3 exams, all 3 of them, not 2 of the 3, on all 3 of them, then you get a thing that's a proficient sticker, seal. If you score at the top level, which is distinguished on each of the 3 exams, then you get this seal that says distinction. It's the only way to earn it.
But again, we're talking 2 different diplomas.
Well, that's the
With a
question,
sticker.
well, it's the same diploma.
One's gonna say proficiency,
One will say
one's gonna have
proficient and one will say distinction.
It'll have a seal on it. It's in addition to it being a diploma, it will have this seal.
What seal do we have now? Just a state seal?
This is in the.
Bob's signature.
This is all possibly maybe too. I mean,
Right.
it's in
And
the
we don't-
regulations.
Right,
but-
we don't know if school districts will be, I think as I recall.
I just wonder if kids wanna go on to college or something, and they look at the kid's diploma, and, oh, you only got a proficiency, you didn't get, I mean, are we doing them a favor?
Well, as I recall the regulation.
I question the validity of what the diploma's gonna be in a few years.
Shouldn't we acknowledge?
As I recall the regulation, it talks about, you may have that. The state is not mandated.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I think as I recall.
Because it just says
you have that
established
option,
here,
you
I
have
thought that was, and then my final question is, when I went to school, I went to Catholic school in the Archdiocese, we had a midterm and a final. The test came from the Archdiocese, which in this case, I guess would be like the state. However, teachers were given, like lesson plans, and there was certain information they were required to complete for each semester. Are we going to be getting the same thing from the state, what is going to be, so you can help prepare for these? There has to be some kind of guideline as to what they expect you, or what they expect the level of instruction to have accomplished at a given point in time.
What they.
Are we going to be, are they going to do the same thing?
It's the standards.
They've given us
Now
the
it's the
standards.
standards to say, here's
Yeah, in
what
other
you need
words,
to do.
if we get a test, say, in January, midterm, well, this will be once a year, we have twice a year. But they will expect you as an instructor to have achieved a certain level of instruction and the student should understand. So that when they make up the, okay.
Yeah, they've given us the standards.
Okay.
And so
All
they're
right.
saying by
That's
5th
all.
grade, 8th
Okay.
grade, and 11th grade,
All right.
you should have met those standards. But it's a K-12 program. You
Yeah,
can't expect.
Because I didn't
all-
think we were flying blind from the questions. I was getting the
No.
impression like we were kind of like, how do we know what to teach and, okay.
No, we have the standards.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Alrighty, members of the audience, any questions? Mrs. Penniman?
Bobby Penniman, Lansdale Borough. Dr. Hassler, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. It was very illuminating, and I really did learn quite a bit. Appreciate it very much. When you went over what's currently in place, you didn't mention, was that an all-inclusive list? You didn't mention AllSat and...
No.
Okay. There's no plan to do away with any of those tests that you didn't mention right now? Okay. I heard the allusion, I'm not sure who said it, something made me think that testing is a bad thing. I don't believe testing is a bad thing at all. I believe that it's a very good thing, and I'm very, very pleased with this approach. And the words I jotted down on my notes were continuous improvement, which is something we have in my workplace and in virtually every other workplace I'm familiar with, at least that's an effective workplace. And it seems to me that that's where we're going here. Part of that is continually assessing our results, and you can only do that by testing. And of course, in a business environment, it's not by a test per se, but by the different measures that we're expected to accomplish. So I'm very much an advocate of what you're doing here. I don't want to get into a long conversation about the PSSA results, but I'm a very graphical kind of person, which is why I had my Ross Perot chart with me last time. And I looked at these and I kind of drew arrows in terms of where I saw the trend going for each of the categories. And even though we should be very proud that our results are significantly better than the state as a whole, something must be going awry, because in most categories, our results are actually trending either stable or on a downward track. Is that correct?
Not
Or-
exactly. A
Not
couple comments I
exactly.
think would be appropriate for our analysis here, since we're looking at the numbers carefully. One thing that I need to share, even though the interpretation of it may not enlighten the discussion, the state has not fixed these scales until 1996. The 95 results, the ones that Terry was referring to, the 3 years later, they're not on the same scale. The difference may not be measurable at the wide ranges around it. Higher, significantly higher, may not be too different, but the scale really wasn't fixed until 96. At that point, all the scores are relative to that. So the 95 scores, you have to say, yeah, but about it, because if you don't, then you're not really analyzing them properly. The other is, the way these tests are constructed, they say 50-point differences. Anything less than that, they're not significant. In fact, you shouldn't look at them as different. They don't mean anything. That's how the test is constructed. At the school level, Anything less than 50 points is not significant. Now, does that, so when we're talking about 20 points, 10 points, well, the numbers are here, so we tend to say, oh, up, down, up, down. It's the right thing to do. And we're looking at trends, and are those trends significant is what we're asking. We really need a lot more data to be able to analyze these things fairly. So as much as you're doing the same kind of exercise we do, as we're saying, okay, what happened here? 3 years later, let's see what's happening there. We're looking for scores that are going up, not down, of course. So, however, we also keep in mind the nature and the limitations of the test, and those are real, those limitations. So we have to be careful in analyzing those differences as to whether they're positive or negative. So yes, we see those things. Are they down or up?
Well, you're the mathematician. You could tell us if the standard deviation on the Pennsylvania tests are 10 points or more, and what the standard deviation is for the North Penn results. It's quite a bit different. Of course, we're talking about apples and oranges because we're talking about a very large number of students across the entire state. But then we have to look at the fact that the North Penn School District is, where are we, ranked 5th in the state in terms of the size? Number of students, So, you know, when we say standard, 50 points one way or the other is irrelevant, I'm not sure that that applies to North Penn the same way that it applies to, a school district in the middle of the state out.
An issue of scale.
Yeah.
Not to get into an analysis of data, but a school like York Avenue predictably is going to have scores that bump around a lot more than a school like North Penn High School. That's the point you're attempting to cover.
I'm trying. You're the mathematician. Thank you.
Anybody else, please? Mr. Gordon.
H. Bruce Gordon, Montgomery Township. Dr. Hasso, thank you for that presentation. It certainly brought across, and I hope it replays appropriately across video, for the energy and enthusiasm that these programs are bringing to our educators in the district. And I certainly hope that that translates all the way down to the kids and the thirst for learning that our kids will have as they go through assessment, despite the fact that they're going to grumble and groan at night that, oh, gee, I got another test tomorrow. I know we have that in our house, but I certainly would be thankful for that ongoing assessment of our children instead of just once every 3 years seeing those test scores come home. Question for you, that you had showed us a chart there with factors as to if we work on these particular programs, we'll get the biggest bang for the buck. One of the ones that struck me was the 1.0 ranking for time on task. That sounds like block scheduling, or it sounds like it could be a way to get more time on the task.
No, basically what that's talking about is how much time are students on task within the classroom. So it's not, it's a measure that's done within existing classrooms in a sense. Are they on task? Are they off task? The research shows that if they're on task, obviously, common sense, I guess, they're on task more, they're going to learn more. So it's not block scheduling.
It's on task different from a block of 30 minutes doing math, or you're saying within that block?
Within whatever period. It would apply to block scheduling, it would apply to a 30-minute period, it would apply to a 40-minute period. It's just within the instructional time, are we ensuring that students are on task learning the maximum amount of time?
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anybody else, please? Ms. Olkowski.
Most of you, June Olkowski, Tomenson Township. As most of you know, over the last several years, I've been very concerned over our dropout rate. And much of this, I realize, is from students who know they're not performing academically and just get discouraged and feel there's no reason to stay in school. And I've hoped over the last several years that we'd begin addressing problems way back at the elementary level, particularly with reading and math, which of course are the hinge pins for everything else. I'm very concerned about these assessments scores than I was when I saw them in the Inquirer. What the Inquirer listed, which our little paper here doesn't, is not only results compared to the whole state, but compared to school districts with similar parent incomes. And in that area, we did not do too well in many places. Even with the information we have here, in 94 and 95, 94, 95, and 95, 96 in particular. In some cases, we were actually under the state averages. And frankly, the state of Pennsylvania nationally is not ranked very high. And since we are a big district, since we're a wealthy district in a wealthy area of the country with very highly educated parents, I find these figures appalling. And when you look at these charts, it looks like we're way, way beyond the state. But of course, we only use the last upper portion of the chart, which makes a difference of 50 or 100 points out of 1,300 or 1,400 in some cases, look like a huge difference. But when you compare it over those whole 1,300 points, we're maybe 8–10% over the state. And again, since Pennsylvania is way down there educationally on a national scale, again, I'm appalled that we're not any higher. And I just hope that we start really taking these results seriously and doing something about them and take our focus off building and administrators and teachers being happy and well paid and contented and start focusing on education itself. We need to get back to the basics.
Anybody else, please? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.